I want to talk about trauma today. I want to talk about trauma. I believe that one of the biggest issues that affects the church, is the trauma that we have been through with God that's never been healed. The trauma that we have just forgotten about or tried to forget about and just moved on from. And I believe that it's trauma. It's trauma that we've experienced that's never been healed, that has opened the door to so much dysfunction, so much demonic garbage, so many lies that have just led us down all these different roads of dysfunction. And I believe it's the trauma that's never been healed that prevents us from being able to move past certain things. So that's what I want to talk today. And so afterwards, we're gonna do deliverance. We're gonna kick that garbage out. And I believe that today there's gonna be some of you where you've walked in really, broken. Some of you have walked in broken without knowing that you're broken. And I believe that today that God is going to set some people free. And you're going to see deliverance. Okay? You're going to see demons come out of people. And before I even say another word, if you see demons coming out of people and you see some screaming, well, I guess you do see it. But you'll also hear it. You'll see and hear screaming or crying. Just know this. When you read your Bibles and you read the accounts of Jesus casting demons out of people, if you were there, you'd see the same thing. And please know that when a person's screaming, if a person starts screaming or they start crying, remember, when the demons came out, they came out with screams. Amen. It's not the person. Amen. It's the demon saying, "No, no!" That would have sounded better if I had more of a voice. But I sounded like Mr. Bill when I said that. Okay, so just a heads up, all right? Raise your hand if I got you nervous now. Okay, nobody's going to raise their hand. I know that there's about 10 of you. They're like, "Oh, no!" So I was in, where was I? Somerset, Pennsylvania, and I was ministering actually on trauma. I was speaking on trauma, and so as I'm preaching, like an entire pew of people get up and leave mid message. And I don't know if you're a minister, that always feels really good, You have to have a whole row of people say, "Yep, deuces, we're at." I'm like, what did I say, And so I just felt, as they're getting up, I just felt to ask, can I pray for any of you before you leave? Like right in the middle of my message, can I pray for you? And so one girl, she says, "Can you pray for my pastor?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, where's your pastor? And she's, "Oh, she's right here." This little older lady, right? And I said, "Sure, I can pray for you." And so I said, "Come here." I said, what do you need? So what can I pray for you for? And she says to me, "Can we go in the back room?" I'm like, "Well, no. I kind of have something going on right now. I can't leave. Anybody, why don't we take a pee break? Why don't somebody make a pot of coffee? I'll be back in an hour, right? And so, yeah, I said pee. I see you look, you're like, just say pee? A pee break. Everybody needs one every now and then. Well, anyway, so I said, "Come here," and I said, "What's going on?" She said, I don't want to tell you. I can't say." And I'm like, well, why not? She's like, she said, "It's the worst thing you could ever imagine." I'm thinking to myself, well, let's see, what can I imagine? And do I want to go in the back room with you? And now I really am not going in the back room with you, right? What did you do? I cut 19 kittens' heads off, I don't know what she... And so finally, I'm going to tell you one of the issues with the church, okay? One of the issues in the church is that so many of us are just a bunch of fakes.
There you go.
Right? Like we're a bunch of fakes, and especially leaders. Oh, we can't show that we have any problems, because if we show that we have any problems, then then people are going to think the gospel doesn't work, or whatever, you know. And so I have this idea, like I'm really transparent, almost to a fault. But I believe that if we're willing to get real, then we can be healed. That the masks that we put on, the masks that we cover our faces with, that we try to put on, are masks that, yes, they keep people believing that we're shiny, happy, perfect people. But these masks, these facades, they also keep God out. When we're willing to humble ourselves, and when we're willing to get real, that's when God is able to come in. And, you know, when we finally say, you know what, I'm not perfect and I need help. I need to be fixed. And I'm going to humble myself. And I'm going to show you that I'm not Mrs. or Mr. Perfect. Well, here she is. She's like, oh, no, never mind. And I'm like, just tell me what happened. And she said, okay. And she said, I killed my husband. I'm like, want to go in the back room? I'm like, you killed your husband? I said, do tell, you know, what do you mean you killed? And she told me 4 years earlier, she was sitting in her little chair, she was doing a crossword puzzle, her husband was laying in bed, and she looked up, and all of a sudden he's like going into, his whole body's convulsing. Like his body's like just shaking, and she said, I was a nurse, and she said I had two choices. She said either I go and run for my phone and call 911, or I go and I tend to him. And she said, and so I decided to go for my phone. I guess he was like, 300 pounds and 6'5", like this huge guy. And she comes back and she finds that he's dead. And she said, I killed my husband. And then she said, and because I killed my husband, God gave me cancer. And I'm like, you got bad theology, lady. I didn't say that, but I'm thinking it, right? I'm like, and so I looked at her, and I pointed at her, and I said, I didn't point at her, I actually pointed at the demon, but I said, it's a lie, straight out of the pit of hell. You did not kill your husband. And all of a sudden she was freaking out. She said, I killed my husband, I killed my husband, I killed my husband, I killed. She started screaming. And so I said, come out in the name of Jesus. And as soon as I said that, she went, bam, hit the floor, and she let out these 3 blood-curdling screams. And then she was silent and just laying there. And so I went back to preaching. I want to understand this, okay? I want to understand. There isn't a single time when I've ever preached this message and told that story when I said, I actually, before I said it, I said, let's see what they do. There isn't a single time that I preached this message, told that story where I said, and then I went back up to preach, and people didn't start laughing. And I don't understand. I just don't understand that. So I went back to preaching. Next show's tonight at 6. So anyway, she finally comes to, and she gets up and she says, hey, can I say something? I said, sure. Gave her the microphone. She said, for 4 years, that has been a weight sitting on me. For 4 years, I've been tormented by this thought in my mind that I'm a murderer. And she said, it's completely gone. Amen. It's completely gone. This is what Jesus does, right? This is what Jesus does. Jesus sets people free. And I'm talking, I've seen women 80 years old who were molested when they were 5 years old, carrying that junk for 75 years and 80 years old, they're liberated. I've seen little kids who have been abused, who are set free from the trauma of abuse or whatever the trauma that would have taken their lives in a direction that they would have never wanted to go in. This is what Jesus says when we talk about Jesus being a deliverer. Like, he sets people free from a devil who wants to kill you. He sets people free from a devil who is stealing from you, killing you, and out to destroy your life. And make no mistake about it, okay? The dysfunction that we deal with is way more than just bad, poor thinking. Where it's like, okay, we change the way we think and we're all better. No. There are people in here, you've been trying to change the way you think for 30 years, for 40 years, 50 years, and you can't change the way you think. Do you know why? Because you got a demon in you that needs to come out of you. Yeah. Where it's not so easy to just be like, I'm not going to think this thought anymore. And then the thought comes back again. That was my whole life. Prior to Jesus, it was like, I was a rat. I was full of rejection. I was full of anger. I was full of rage. I was trying so hard to change the way I thought because I loved my girlfriend at the time. She's not my girlfriend anymore, and I don't love her anymore. But I loved her, and I didn't want to think the way I thought. But I was absolutely powerless to change my thinking. And then even after I came to Christ, I was powerless to change my thinking. I wanted to, but ultimately it was God who set me free from demonic junk that was dry. And I've received this revelation that it is demons that cause dysfunction. Genesis 3, 1 through 7, we're going to take a look at the first place where trauma shows up. This was the first trauma to hit the earth. It says, Genesis 3, 1 and 7, it says, Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Did God actually say that you shall not eat of any of the tree in the garden? Eat of any tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the tree that's in the garden, but God said, You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that's in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, You will surely not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. And so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. So at this point, Adam and Eve, so God had given Adam and Eve dominion over the earth, right? He had given them authority over the earth. And so when Adam and Eve obeyed Satan, when they sinned, okay, they handed over all the authority that God had given them. They handed it over to Satan. And it was at that point, when Adam and Eve obeyed Satan and they gave him the authority, that Satan became the god of this world. And at that point, Satan set out to fulfill his mission. What's his mission been? His mission has been to traumatize humanity. And he's done a really good job of that. It's astounding. It's scary. It's staggering. The thought, okay, of like I know, like we come to Christ and we come into our little church bubble. Or, remember back in the 70s, there was or maybe early 80s, there was a movie called The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. It was before John Travolta got weird, right? The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, where the dude had some kind of sickness where, like, if he breathed outside air, he would die. And so he had to live in this bubble with all this purified air, right? And that's what we're like. We're like the church in the plastic bubble. We get saved and we forget about kind of like after 30 years or so, where we've been in the church, where we do churchy things, where we watch churchy things, at least we should, listen to churchy things. Everything is church all day, all the time, right? And we kind of lose focus on like what's going on out there. Like humanity is so broken. I mean, so do you realize that like in like some public schools they have kitty litter boxes for kids that identify as cats? Like it's funny, but it's really not funny. It's indicative of like severe brokenness, and that's like minuscule compared to what's going on out there. Like the sin in this world is so great. Why? Because people have been so traumatized. And that trauma has opened them up to demonic stuff that's taking them here and there and everywhere. John 10:10 says this: the thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. This not only affected Adam and Eve, but every person, but rather even the earth itself. Like I was driving with my daughter yesterday, and we were talking about what sin has done. And I said, even the earth itself has been affected by sin. And I said, someday we're going to get to heaven, and the colors that we see are going to be just amazing. And I say, you see how drab and gray and dull everything is? The brown grass. I said, that was never supposed to be. We can't even imagine. But even the earth itself was affected by sin. And can you even, like Romans 8:22 tells us, for we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Like even the earth was affected by, it was traumatized. And so have you ever been like, maybe you were living in sin somewhere. Maybe there was a sin that you were involved in, and then God like gave you some freedom, and you had like a little bit of time, where maybe you had a year or so or however long where you were like, wow, I'm free from this sin. I know I have, and like pornography. And then all of a sudden you like fall flat on your face and you find and you fall back into that sin. And it's a great time until it's over. And then all of a sudden you're hit by, oh my goodness, what did I just do? I can't believe that I just did that. Can you even imagine what that must have felt like for Adam and Eve? To never know a moment of sadness, to never know a depressed thought, a fearful thought, to never have a single thought that's like your life just complete bliss and peace and joy and sunshine and rainbows and flowers, and then all of a sudden it's all lost. And you realize, oh my goodness, what did I just do? From that day on, everyone was traumatized by being born into a fallen world. Do you realize that every single one of us have experienced trauma simply for the fact that we've been born into this cesspool of a world? Some of us have been traumatized by being abused, and I know with the amount of people that's in this room today, I can guarantee you that there's more than a few of you that have experienced abuse. Yeah, me too. Many of us have been abused, and we've all traumatized ourselves by engaging in sin. Do you know? Okay, now we know that God hates sin. Why? Because we know, number one, He's a holy God. And a holy God hates sin. But here's another reason why God hates sin so much. God hates sin so much because He loves you so much. And He knows what sin does to your heart. Every time we sin, when we disobey God, it's a trauma to our heart. Every time we disobey God, it affects us somehow. It breaks us. And there's certain sin that break us more. Right? But here's the good news. Isaiah 61:1 says this: the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. Jesus, he stepped into the temple when his ministry began, and he quoted this verse, and he quoted Isaiah 61:1. He said, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, and he sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, and to proclaim liberty to captives, and the opening of the prison doors to those who are bound. That's the good news, that Jesus, he came to set us free. And those are not just words. I see it everywhere. That's what I do for a living. I travel all over the country, and I see people getting set free from anxiety. I see them getting set free from suicide thoughts. I see them getting set free from depression. I see them getting set free from addictions. I see that Jesus really did come to set the captives free, and he really did come to open prison doors. And he's going to set some captives free today, and he's going to open some prison doors today. And you can take that to the bank. Take it to the bank. And listen, so now let's talk about that. Let's break that down a little bit. So it talks about captives, and it talks about prisoners. He said two things there. He's come to set captives free and open prison doors. So who are captives? Captives are people, if somebody takes you into captivity, you're walking down the street and somebody comes and they say, hey, I'm going to snatch you up. Well, guess what? It's against your will. If you didn't do anything wrong, if you were just walking down the street, but you were taken into captivity. So spiritual captives are people who have been abused. Spiritual captives are people who have been rejected or abandoned. Spiritual captives are people who have had things done to them. They didn't deserve it. And that's people who have experienced abuse have been placed in spiritual captivity. Who are the prisoners? Okay, so we know that people who are put in prison, it's because of their own sin. It's because of the things that they've done. And so people in spiritual captivity, like I said, we've all been traumatized by the things that we've done. There are certain sins that as soon as you commit them, will put you in spiritual prison. You know, sexual sin, all of it. If you're not married, it will put you and has put you in spiritual prison. All witchcraft. That's yoga. I know I probably made somebody's like, you just lost me on that one. No, I'm going to say it because I see what comes out of people when I pray for people, when they repent of that. Oh, stop it, I'm just stretching. No, you're stretching and you're practicing Hinduism. Those little poses are actually a prayer to a Hindu god. The word yoga means to yoke to. As you do those poses, you're yoking yourselves to Hindu gods, which are demons. Amen. Time to repent of that. Different things, witchcraft, Reiki, different things like that. These are things that we do. That smoking weed will put you into. I'll tell you what, I did a post one time. I made a post saying that smoking marijuana opens the door to witchcraft, and you would have thought that I murdered somebody's grandmother. People in the church. Well, I don't know about that, Kevin. And I'm like, well, I do know about that because I cast these things out. But there's things that will put us in. So the prisoners are in prison because of sin that they've committed. But Jesus came to open those prison doors. Galatians 6:8 says, for the one who sows to his own flesh will from his flesh reap corruption. Both captives and prisoners are traumatized people. Psalm 34:17 says that when the righteous cry for help, The Lord hears and delivers them out of all their trouble. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves the crushed in spirit. The blood of Jesus was shed to set you free from your captors, but it was also shed to spring you out of prison. I'm a really good person to kind of share this message. Like, what people don't understand, like my ministry, like I have my ministry is mainly freedom ministry, right? The thing that I do most is I pray for the sick and I cast out devils, and I teach the church how to pray for the sick and cast out devils. It's pretty much, it's what I do. But what people don't realize, like, I have such a passion for freedom ministry because I am somebody that God has set free. My father was born, I was born into a family, okay? Like, well, when I was born, in case you haven't noticed, I got problems with my hands, right? I got problems, and no, you don't need to pray for me because they're not broken. They don't look like yours, but they're not broken. And it's not a faithless thing, it's just God has healed me and I've fallen in love with my hands. Right? People are like, come on, brother, give me those fingers. We're going to pray for those. I'm like, why? I'm like, after you pray for my fingers, I'm going to pray for your big nose. Well, you don't need to pray for my nose. Yeah, I know. Just like you don't need to pray for my fingers. They don't look too pretty, but they work just fine and they don't hurt. But I was born with problems with my hands and problems with my feet. I was never supposed to walk. I was never supposed to hold a pencil. I was never supposed to, do any of those things. Like my mother was going to be carrying me my whole life. I was going to be in a wheelchair. And more than likely, the doctor said that I was mentally retarded. Not only was I given a death sentence on the day I was born, but my father was a schizophrenic alcoholic. And from the time I can remember, I'd wake up in the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, to my father screaming. I'd wake up to dishes hitting the wall. I'd wake up to my mother being terrorized by my father, and I'm up in my bed with my blanket up above my head, just like my whole body, my whole 4 or 5-year-old body trembling. And then my mom would come up and she'd say, come on, we have to go. We're going to grandma's. And we didn't have a car, and so here I am, like, woken up from a dead sleep by this. I remember having to walk past my father as he was like stomping around and breaking things and screaming and swearing. And I remember just the terror that I felt having to walk past him as a little kid. It was trauma. It's trauma. And then next thing you know, I remember Christmas Eve, 3 o'clock in the morning, all our presents under the Christmas tree. And I'm walking down the highway to my grandmother's with my mom and my brother and sister in December. You talk about trauma. And then I started school. Couldn't wait to start school. Couldn't wait to ride the bus. Until I actually got on the bus and all the kids started making fun of my fingers. Like, I grew up, I hated school because the kids made fun of me so bad. It was trauma. And at some point, I was sexually molested by my uncle and my mentally challenged cousin. And so I grew up, with this severe hate, that trauma opened the door to stuff. And I hated myself. Rejection, and I might be talking about that. Well, I don't know what I'm going to talk about tonight, but it opened the door to this rejection, this self-hatred, and so and so then my father, he gets born again, and he starts driving us to church, and I'm watching my father be one way in front of his church friends, and then we're in the car, and he's going crazy over the fact that my mother didn't buy chicken. It was horrible, and so I'm like, you know what? I want nothing to do with your God. I watched how fake he was, and I was like, no thanks. And so God wasn't a viable option for me. And so as I grew up, and my mind was on fire. And so what did I do? Instead of running to the one who could put his arms around me and minister to my heart, Jesus, Instead of running to God and receiving what I needed from God, running to God and letting Him put out the fire in my mind, no, I'm not going to God because He doesn't help anybody. So what did I do? I began to run to pornography. And from as early as I can remember, I was a pornography addict. And I grew up that way. And it was like, and what I didn't realize was every time I ran to that, and it doesn't name your thing, okay? Maybe it's not porn, maybe it's food, maybe it's, drugs or alcohol, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. We run to these things as a means to medicate ourselves. Listen, if you struggle with some sort of addiction, I'll be the first person to tell you that you're not a dreg of society. You're not a perv. You're not all these things. What you are is broken. You need your heart healed. You're broken because what it is. Because I run to these things to medicate my heart, to put the fire out of my mind for just a little while, and not knowing that I'm just traumatizing my heart. I'm breaking myself. And then when it's all over, then you feel 1,000 times worse than you felt. Then you feel even lower. And then you feel all that shame. And the shame makes you feel 1,000 times worse. So guess what you do? You don't go to God, so you run right back into the sin to medicate. You see how this works? That was my life. Trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma that broke my heart, that drove me into dysfunction, that drove me into pain. I see it all the time. I remember I was in Virginia and I did a deliverance, a mass deliverance, and there was a youth group there. And I'm commanding demonic garbage out of people, and everybody's getting set free, and there was one girl who was sitting in the back like this. And she didn't want any part of anything that we were doing. She didn't want any part of anything I was saying, and what are you going to do? Can't force anybody. And so then afterwards, everybody's kind of walking around and talking, and so that girl, she comes up to me, and she says to me, "Okay, Mr. Kevin, I'm ready for you to do what you do." I'm like, "I just did what I do." She said, "I know, but now I'm ready." I said, "Well, what do you need me to pray for you for?" And she told me, she said, here she is, this youth group kid, beautiful girl, 15 years old, just stunningly beautiful, looked happy, and she comes up and she says, I was raped last week. Wow. And he took my virginity. And I was like, all right. And so I ended up leading her in a prayer to forgive him. We broke soul ties, and I began to command that stuff out of her. And here she is, this 15-year-old kid, facing a garbage can, and she's like, "Bleh," and it's all coming out of her. And when we were done, she said to me, "I feel completely different." Praise God. And so then that night I'm laying in bed, and I'm thinking about the night's events and everything that had happened, and I was kind of having a dialogue with God and just kind of praising him and just saying, "God, you're so awesome." And the Lord spoke to me, and he said, "Tonight I changed the trajectory of that girl's life." See, here's how it works. So this kid, she's in the church, she's serving God, right? She's serving God, and then all of a sudden something like that happens. She gets abused, demonic stuff gets in, and so the devil, who is he? He's the father of lies. And so what do demons do? Demons lie to people. And so as soon as the demonic junk gets in, it's bent on hammering her mind. It's telling her who she is. Well, that's all you're worth. blah, 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 blah. Just going again, trying to hammer her identity. Yep, you're not worth love. All you are is a piece of meat. All you are is just a body. Blah, 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 blah. And then he begins to accuse God. And what about your God? Where was he when you were being abused? And then all of a sudden, the enemy begins to put a wedge between her and God. So now God has proven himself to be unfaithful to her. And so now all her mind, like rejection gets in and all this junk gets in, and now she's like, God is not an option for healing, and God is not an option for love. And so now she begins to turn to men. She begins to turn to men. She begins to smoke weed. She begins to drink. She begins to do things that she would never do before. I've seen this so many times. People who were living a godly life, something happens to them and they completely go off the rails. Why? Because it's demonic junk. Trauma opens the door, demonic junk. That demonic junk takes people places where they never dreamed that they would go. Until finally, here she is 45 years later. She's trying to get off of drugs. She's living, she's divorced, from this guy who is a complete narcissist who's just beat her down in every way. And she's standing in the prayer line. This is the trajectory that trauma takes a person. Can anybody identify with what I'm saying? Yeah, I know. Like, I think that the way I see it, there are three ways that a person gets traumatized. Number one is abandonment by a loved one. Number two, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And number three, sin. Those are the three ways that people get traumatized. So for many, the first trauma they experience is the lack of love from a parent. A lack of love from a parent. Like, I'm looking at you with that's not your baby. Is that your baby? So I'm looking at you with your baby, okay? And so I know that when you're changing her little diaper, okay, or after you've given her a bath, you lay her down and you're doing all the little stuff with her belly, going to get you, right there. You're blowing little raspberries on her belly. You're squeezing her cheeks. You're saying, Mommy loves you so much. Daddy loves you so much, right? You're doing all that stuff. Do you know that a baby needs that? Yeah. Do you know how important that is? You feel like a fool. Like you say, wow, I sound so weird. But you know what? Like that baby, look at her grabbing for dad. That baby needs that. I heard a story about these refugee babies in the Soviet Union. Something happened in the Ukraine. This was years ago, right? Years ago, there was something that happened. Not this debacle, not this farce that we're hearing today. But back in the day, there was something that happened, and all of these little babies were brought over from the Ukraine into the Soviet Union. Like babies probably that size, right? And so you had the nurses, the Russian nurses, who basically, like these babies were in the nursery. They would pick the babies up. They would pop a bottle in their mouth. They would change their diapers and put them right back into their little cribs, like robots. They didn't show these babies any kind of love. They didn't do any of the raspberry stuff, your little cheeks, none of that stuff. And every one of those kids, well, the majority of the kids of those babies died. They died from lack of love. And the ones that didn't die, the ones that were a little bit stronger, they didn't die, but they grew up with major mental deficiencies. They had failure to thrive and mental deficiencies. They were messed up. And so maybe it wasn't like that for you. Maybe it wasn't that severe, but I can guarantee you that if you grew up in a house where one of your parents left, where maybe you had your parents were in the house, but they didn't show you the love that you needed. Maybe they were there, but they weren't there. Maybe they never talked to you. Maybe they were never home. They just didn't show you. They never told you they loved you. They never hugged you. They never gave you any of that. Or maybe one of your parents was abusive, or the worst, maybe you were sexually abused by a parent. I can guarantee you that if you grew up in a house where you didn't receive love from your parents, that has affected you in more ways than you can imagine. And you're like, I don't know, Kevin. I've always it didn't affect me. And you don't know if it affected you. You don't know how it affected you because it's how you've always been. Let me tell you something. This was never God's will for your life. This is God's will for your life. You're like, well, it's just the way I am. It's just the way I'm made. I just have a quick trigger. Or I'm just a worrier. It's not the way God made you. Jesus died for you to get you off the roller coaster, man. Like, this is God's will for your life, not this. Many of us grew up in a home where there was a lack of love from a parent or both parents. We've grown up in those kind of homes. Many of us, I think that most of us can all think of instances of abandonment, emotional or physical abuse, when we can look back on those particular instances and identify them as times that our hearts were damaged. Can you think of something in your life? Can you think of something in your life where after that thing happened, you were never the same again? I think most of us can. So it's my from what I've seen in doing what I do, I've found that these times that where you were one way, and then all of a sudden something happened to you, and you weren't the same again. It was those instances of trauma. It was those instances of trauma where demonic spirits slip in and begin to feed us lies, hammer our identities, and oppress us. And I know that there's people in here that say, how in the world can a Christian have a demon? When you were born again, your spirit was saved. And in Ephesians, it says how we were sealed. So you're born again spirit. So when you were born again, the Spirit of God came in, regenerated your sin-dead spirit. Your spirit was made perfect, completely sanctified and sealed, waiting for the day that Jesus comes back. Amen. Or the day that you croak, and your perfected spirit goes to heaven. However, your spirit was born again, your soul and your body were not born again. Your spirit was sanctified, but your soul, as you pursue Jesus, is being sanctified. Your soul consists of your mind, your will, and your emotions. When demons are present, that's where they're present, in your mind, will, and emotion. Not your born-again spirit. Your born-again spirit is completely separated from your flesh. You can say, how can a Christian have a demon? The same way the Bible says that there is nothing good about your flesh. The Bible says that your flesh is sinful through and through, yet we never question the fact that that the Holy Spirit can dwell in a house that's sinful through and through. You're going to find, listen, some of you, you're listening to this, you're like, I want to get out of here. Trust me, don't leave. Trust me, don't leave. God has brought you here for a reason. And you're going to see the reality of this today. Okay? So stick with me. But demonic spirits, a broken Mind, will, and emotions cause depression. A broken mind, demonic spirits and a broken mind, will, and emotions cause anxiety. They destroy our self-worth. A broken heart leads us into destructive, sinful actions as a way of medicating our minds. We give ourselves away sexually in search of love that we've always wanted but never received. We view ourselves so poorly that we begin to yoke ourselves to other people who view themselves poorly. And traumatized people traumatize people. Broken people break people. Maybe you come out of all sorts of trauma. You got with a dude who comes out of all sorts of trauma, and then you're like oil and water. Right? It's because you're both broken. Because you both got demonic spirits that are pitting you against each other. There are signs and symptoms of undealt with trauma. Okay, we're going to give you a few signs and symptoms of the fact of how you know that you need healed. How you know that you've got trauma that's still working. You guys tracking with me? Have I lost you guys? Are you like hating me? Are you like, Pastor Dirk, how could you have this guy here? Anybody planning it? Anybody thinking of the email they're going to send him? All right, signs and symptoms of undealt with trauma. Nightmares. Nightmares. I say this everywhere I go because it needs to be said everywhere I go. There was a woman. I was in Honduras, and the team was, I was leading a team, and they all went to feed people. And I didn't feel like going. I just wanted to hang out by the van. I needed a break. And so I'm there with one of my interpreters. This girl comes walking by, and she's, and I start talking to her. And turns out she was from Guatemala in Honduras to visit family. And she told, and so we were talking, and we're talking about stupid stuff, talking about like the weather and all that, and Guatemala and that business. And then, but as she's talking to me, okay, I got this thought that keeps pounding into my head. She gets visited and violated at night by a demon. And I'm like, I don't want to think this right now, I'm like, where's this thought? But it was like the Lord was just speaking to me about this. I'm having a conversation about the weather, and the Lord's telling me this stuff. And I'm like, finally, I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to put it out there. And I said, hey, I got a crazy question for you. But do you get visited in the night by a demonic spirit? All of a sudden, tears pouring out of her eyes. She told me that, remember when Trump was first elected, and supposedly all those people from Central America were walking across Mexico to the U.S. border. Remember that? And supposedly it was just grassroots. These people just decided to do it on their own. Well, she told me that they were actually paying people. They were giving them food. They were giving them money. And they were going and recruiting people. Well, anyway, she was going across Mexico. And she was abducted by one of the drug cartels, and they abused her over and over and over and over, like she said, thousands of times. Until they thought she was dead. They kicked her out into the ditch, and they left her there in the desert. Turns out she didn't die, but after that happened, every night she would go to bed. After that much abuse, she would go to bed every night, and this thing would come and violate her. And so here I am, like, isn't God so cool? I'm probably the only person in Mexico or in Honduras that knew how to deal with something like that. And if I wasn't the only, I was probably one of the very few. But the Lord brought me from the United States, put me right here in this spot, brought her from Guatemala, put her right here in the spot, and the Lord said she's being visited and we're going to set her free. You talk about God. Talk My God. She went to a pastor, and the pastor told her, she told him what was happening. He said, what you need is a psychiatrist. You're crazy. And I'll tell you what, I led her through prayers, and she got set free from that thing. That thing came out of her. But I'm here to tell you, if that's you, you're not crazy. And if it's you, I can help you. So if it is you, you come and you talk to me, okay? I can't think of anything worse. But sometimes people, they have another woman who was visited at night by one of those things, and then in her dream, and it would violate her every night. She'd dream it, and then she'd wake up feeling as if it had happened. These things happen. So nightmares. So people that have like persistent nightmares, it's a sign and a symptom of the fact that there's trauma that needs to be dealt with. Flashbacks, okay? Certain smells take you right back to that place. Certain songs you hear take you right back to that place. A certain season takes you right back to that place. A certain holiday takes you right back to that place. That's a symptom of trauma that needs dealt with. Depression. Now, sometimes depression can be a physical issue, but a lot of times depression is a symptom of unhealed trauma. Next, porn, sexual addiction. Just about every guy that I've ever prayed for, or every woman that I've ever prayed for that deals with that has got some sort of trauma in their background, where their father treated them terribly, where they were beat on, where just terrible things happened to them. Unforgiveness or bitterness. If you look at somebody and you just feel rage when you look at them. The desire to see somebody pay. Just, like you take pleasure in bad things happening to a person. That tells me that you've got bitterness and unforgiveness, which says that there's trauma in your heart that's never been healed. Next, anxiety. Anxiety is a direct result of trauma. Just about every person that I've ever prayed for to be freed from anxiety has been abused or grew up in a home where there was constant strife. You grow up in a house where that fight or flight thing is always cranking. It's a perfect storm for anxiety as a person gets older. Or maybe that's not. Maybe some sort of trauma. You were in a fire. Maybe you were abused. Trauma opens the door to anxiety. Unhealed sickness, or a person who loses their healing. There are certain sicknesses that are 100% driven by trauma. Fibromyalgia is a sickness that's a direct result of trauma. Fibromyalgia is a trauma-based issue. And people wonder, I've been prayed for 1,000,000 times for fibromyalgia and nothing ever happens. It's because you need your heart healed. The majority of the women that I prayed for with fibromyalgia, the majority of them, 95% of them have been abused in some way. Soldiers, they come back from war and they have chronic pain syndrome. Chronic pain syndrome. And listen, PTSD, post-traumatic stress demons. Kick demons out of people, they no longer have PTSD. Well, listen, when it comes to sickness, okay? So what happens is when there is emotional, when there's trauma, we carry trauma at the cellular levels of our body. Okay? The cellular levels of our body. And as we get older, that trauma that we carry, like as we're growing up, that thing is like working behind the scenes, deteriorating our bodies. And then you hit about 30, 35 years old, and all of a sudden you start having pain in your body that you never had. you start feeling pain in your body that you never had. Maybe your spine, like degeneration. That's another one caused by trauma. Degeneration, joint degeneration, disc degeneration, bone degeneration. Arthritis is another trauma-based issue. Could be something else too. But here's the thing: when a person's heart has been damaged, okay, when a person has a wound in their heart, okay, what happens is the wound in the heart will begin to, the infection from that wound will begin to infect the physical body and break down the physical body. And so a lot of times when there's a wound, when there's a wound, just pray. We might pray for somebody, and the pain goes away, and then it comes back. Why? It's because the wound that's in the heart, the infection in the heart will reinfect the physical body. And in the same way, you got Mr. On Top of the World, zippity-doo-dah, that guy? And all of a sudden he gets sick, and then the sickness in his body infects his heart. It infects his soul, and all of a sudden he becomes Mr. Down in the Dumps. See, we're spirit, soul, and a body. Now we know that our spirit man, if we're born again, is sealed and untouchable. But our soul and our bodies are not two separate compartments, but they're like this. And if the soul is wounded and infected, then it will affect the physical. And if the physical is sick, a lot of times the physical will affect the soul. Do you understand? There was a woman, and I'm going to wrap up now. There was a woman who came to me. Her name was Renee, and she had fibromyalgia, degenerative disc disease, and she had sciatica. She had 3 little kids. She couldn't take care of them. Her husband drove trucks, so he was never home. And she was like, Kevin, I can barely get out of bed. Would you pray for me? I asked her, I said, have you ever been abused? Oh, no, I've never been abused. Anybody else in your family have this? Oh, nobody in my family has this. Every question I asked, no. I prayed for her, and nothing happened. Prayed 25 minutes to a half an hour, I'm praying, no change. And so finally I said, Renee, so you've never been abused? She said, well, I was raped when I was 14, but that doesn't count. I said, okay. I said, well, we're going to pray for forgiveness for that. Oh, I've already forgiven him. I don't think about that. I don't need to forgive him for this. We're good. Let me tell you something. The demons in you, the demons that are in a person will be like, oh, no, you don't need to do that. You're good. Tell them no. She said, no, and she was fighting. I said, Renee, just humor me. Okay. Lord, I choose to forgive Steve for raping me when I was 14. As soon as the words came out of her mouth, gushing tears. Ding, 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 ding. Jackpot. She forgave him. We broke the soul ties. I commanded that garbage out of her. When all of it came out, I didn't even pray for her for healing. 95% of the pain in her body was gone. And then I prayed for healing, and the last 5% was gone. Completely healed. Why? Because we dealt with the wound in her soul. When we dealt with the wound in her soul, then the wounds in her body were healed. One last story, and then we're gonna do what we're gonna do. So remember the story I opened up with, I killed my husband, that woman? So at the close of the meeting that day, when I called people up, okay, I had a whole row of people standing up here that wanted to be free from the trauma that they had experienced. And so there was one woman who was crying her eyes out. I mean, wailing, crying. And I walked up to her, and I said, Beck, I said, the same, I just gave her a word. I didn't know what the word meant. I said, the same God who heals your son is the God who heals you. And as soon as I said those words, she collapsed on the floor. Nobody caught her, just, and she began to just she let out, again, 3 blood-curdling screams. And then she just laid there crying. What I didn't know was that she had been a college professor and at a Christian college, and she would drop her kids off at the daycare, her son, drop them off at the daycare, and then she would go and teach her class. And one day her son, he says to her, "Mommy, I don't want to go back to school." She says, "I don't want to see the man in black again." She was like, "Oh, stop it. What are you talking about?" So then, 3 days later, it's time for him to go to school, or he had gone to school, and then he came back and said, "Mommy, don't make me go back there. Don't make me go back there. I don't want to drink blood again." The daycare was being run by a group of Satanists that were forcing these kids to do rituals. It was a big thing. A bunch of people got arrested. I mean, it was big news. Can you even imagine the trauma of that? Can you even imagine the trauma of that? When I gave that word, the same God who heals your son is the God who heals you. The Lord set her free from that trauma. Those screams were the demonic junk that she was carrying. She said that when she was on the ground, when she was on the ground, she felt everything, all the pain. She had riddled with pain ever since. All the pain moved right to the center of her body and shot out of the top of her head, she said. And she was completely healed. The next day, she said, "I just laid in bed all day crying." And she said, "I wasn't crying sad tears." She said, "God healed my body the entire day." She said, God was just healing me through my tears. Listen, God wants to set you free from trauma. There are things that you've been holding on to. There's been things that you've been dealing with. There's thinking that you can't stop. There's voices in your head that just are nonstop. There's things telling you what a piece of garbage you are, that you're junk. There's things in you that have been driving you into certain actions that you don't want to do, but you feel powerless against these things. God wants to set you free today. Amen. And it starts with forgiveness. Forgiveness is the key that unlocks the chains of trauma. If you need to be free, come up here. Come on. Okay, now everybody else can come up. Come on. I know how it works. Here. Come on, I know that there's way more than that. Listen, this is not the time